you got to think after Jack Ma kind of disappeared for a couple of years, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to
the message was sent.
The message was sent, message received. And then you start thinking about Chamath, what Trump just did and what Xi Jinping just did. You put those two things together. Trump put all of our top guys, dogs on stage. Here they are.
It's the exact opposite of China. The message is very clear. And it's what Thomas said, technology is a national security imperative. And so we're going to embrace these guys. We're not going to play favorites. We're not going to pick one and not the other. We're not going to have summits and have, the founder of an entire category not be invited. That's just, it's patently stupid and immature. And that's what the Biden administration did.
Picked favorites. Yeah.
And that is dumb based on the implication and importance of technology. I just want to go back to the TikTok thing. I want to make 3 points. One is from the past. I'll give you my sense of the TikTok thing, and I'm going to make a prediction for the future. In 1984, the way that LVMH began was through a deal that Bernard Arnault architected. There was a business owned by the French cotton king, Marcel Boussac, and inside of that empire was Christian Dior. Long story short, his empire was crumbling, and Arnault did a deal where he bought that dying business essentially from the French government for 1 franc. Fast forward now 40 years of very hard work and tremendous execution. That's a $350 billion public company. Now imagine back then in 1984, if the French government actually had done a deal where they said, we'll sell it to you for 50% of whatever you build. Take it for $1, but we're going to own 50% of the upside. And, they would have an extra $175 billion today. I think that that's very important in terms of what is possible today. I like Thomas's math. I believe it. I do think it's about a $100 billion asset. But at the end of the day, the president was very clear that it is completely and entirely worthless without his permit. And he wants to own 50% of this asset. Now, if you're a buyer of something, you're not going to pay $100 billion if you control whether it can exist or not. You're basically going to pay today's equivalent of 1 franc, which would be $1. Now, I'm not saying that it is going to be $1, but if the United States Treasury wants to hold 50% of an asset that could be worth $100 billion or $500 billion or, maybe $1 trillion, it would make sense for the United States Treasury and the United States people to own that at effectively zero. So I think that the incentive is there, and I think he has essentially said that he is going to do the best deal in his interests, which is the United States interests, which I suspect means a price that is as low as possible, approaching $1.
And ultimately, won't this be the Chinese government's decision? Because they could always say, you know what? Let it die.
Maybe. But my point is, it may not be $1. Maybe it could be 25 billion. Maybe it could be 10 billion. But my point is, I find it very hard to see how it gets to the actual value that it is today. So then I think, let me just make a prediction for the future. There's a question that this raises, which is, does it make sense for the American government to be a little bit smarter going forward about how it allocates incentives and resources? The American government is still the largest single landowner in America. We give concessions to private companies to drill, to build things. And it just turns out that if you apply this example more broadly, wouldn't it make sense where when you create incredible economic incentives and upside for private investors and investment, for some portion of that gain to go back to the American people? Is that a bad thing? I don't think so. For example, if you said we're going to accelerate permitting for all these data centers, we're going to make any form of energy, which was the opposite of what the Biden EO said on his way out the door. He had all these conditions. But if the President Trump's EO on data centers says any kind of energy, but we want to own a 5% royalty, and we'll allow you to put it on federal lands, or 10% or 15%, would it really change the underwriting that Blackstone and all these other companies will do? I don't think so. Would it enrich America? I think so. Would it make it easier for people to feel like they're participating in all of these incredible gains? I also think so. So my prediction is that this becomes more of a template for the future It'll be less about permitting. It'll be more about creating incentives and allocating those incentives for a share of the upside. And I think that there is a really strong economic argument for America to do that.
You know, Chamath, to build on that, people don't remember, but Tesla got $465 million from the Department of Energy. That was called the ATVM program, which was the Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing. That was a very visionary program at the time.
Visionary. But it took no equity.
But it didn't take equity. And
that was dumb.
So dumb. They should have gotten some portion of equity, some portion of a loan. Tesla did so well, thanks to Elon and the team's hard work.
I think the
that
president,
they paid it back early. They paid it back early. That's how well they did. If they had owned 10% of Tesla, but 10%.
Yeah, I think the president has sniffed this out, by the way. And you may not think that these are related, but when he said that he's considering eliminating federal income tax and funding this thing from tariffs, and he just had a press conference today where he's inviting every single company to come and make things in the United States because he will create economic incentives to make it here cheaper. But if you make it abroad and bring it in here, he's going to charge money and a tariff. All of this are part and parcel of, I think, this broader economic realization. And unlike 2008, 9, and 10, when we were allocating money, or 2020 and 21 and 22, where we were just sending money out the door with, frankly, no consequence and no accounting. This time around, I think he's got some incredibly sharp business people. This is, by the way, the upside of having folks that have actually been successful in the real world, working inside of government, is they're going to help him get to this realization. And I think it's a really good one.
I don't think Tim Waltz
would have done this.
My only pushback to you, Chamath, on that would be, I just think it's a dangerous game for the government to start picking winners. You know, I wouldn't, for example, if it owns 50% of a TikTok, does it disadvantage a Meta, as an example, right? And I do wonder, is the value capturing mechanism for the government taxes, essentially, right? So the way you capture the portion of the value creation of these companies is through a tax system. And I do think we just have to be careful of the government all of a sudden picking different companies to win. You know, I do think having a good set of incentives, a level playing field, let the competitive dynamics of different companies fight each other, and then capture the value through taxes.
I think you're right. And I think that part is absolutely fundamental. But I think there is a way to architect this. For example, you have these RFPs that by design have to be published in the open source and available for anybody to bid on. My only point is just to say that when there is an ultimate winner, why not have a small stake in the upside? Look at the amount of money that the DOE gives in grants. I'll give you an example. You know, one of these companies that I helped start a few years ago to make advanced battery materials, we got a $150 million grant. I'm very appreciative of that grant. But if they also asked for 5 or 10% of the equity, I would have still said yes.
Of course you would have. Yeah, it's a great deal. And why not give a little upside to the taxpayers? I agree with that.
By the way, a parallel to that would be spectrum, right? If you think about wireless, right, kind of got built, the government auctioned off spectrum and then allowed public, private companies to kind of come and bid on it. And, so there's a lot of different interesting mechanisms you can bring to that.
Yeah.
Freeberg,